the 1800RESPECT logo appears, the National Sexual Assault, Domestic Family Violence and Counselling Service. Underneath are 3 images of LGBTQI couples. Some text appears. The information presented in this webinar is of a general nature and is not a substitute for legal or other professional advice. The views expressed in this presentation do not necessarily represent the views of the Australian Government or MHS. While all reasonable care has been taken in the preparation of this presentation, no liability is assumed for any errors or omissions.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's 1800RESPECT webinar. Before we start, I would like to pay our respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this meeting takes place, and also pay respect to elders both past and present. Now today's topic is understanding the complexities in LGBTIQ domestic and family violence, what to look out for and how to respond. We're very pleased to welcome our presenter for today, Kai Noonan, and you can see her there on the left-hand side of your screen, or right-hand side. Kai is the project coordinator of ACON's Domestic and Family Violence Project, and she's which is one of ACON's many projects designed to support the health and safety of LGBTIQ people. With qualifications in social sciences and psychotherapy, Kai's work has involved counselling, group therapy and adult education for people who have experienced domestic violence. Prior to working for ACON, she worked in various crisis and trauma services with men, women and children in the drug and alcohol, mental health and domestic and family violence sectors. Kai's committed to raising awareness about the violence that also happens in LGBTIQ relationships. Now, before I hand over to Kai, a few key things to note. The webinar is live and it's interactive. You're encouraged to participate by posing questions into the chat box, which is located at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. There'll be approximately 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for question and answer time. And whilst Kai will attempt to answer as many questions as she can, including some pre-submitted questions, if your question is not answered, Kai is happy to be contacted and will provide her details at the end of this webinar. Now, if you're experiencing any difficulty hearing the sound during the webinar, please dial the 1-800 support number that's listed in the chat box. And now we're very excited to pass on to Kai to begin the presentation. Thank you, Kai.
Thank you, Kelly, for the introduction and also for the privilege of being here today to share with everyone listening what I know about domestic and family violence in LGBTIQ relationships. And also thank you, Kelly, for the acknowledgement of country, and I too would like to extend my respects to the traditional owners of the lands, any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining me for this webinar, and also any elders in the domestic and family violence sector. As said in the introduction, my name is Kai and I work for ACON, which is a New South Wales-based HIV and LGBTI health organisation. I'm the coordinator of the Domestic and Family Violence Project there. I was told by Kelly that we actually have record numbers of people registered for this webinar today, which I am mostly really excited about because it says to me a few things. One, that people are genuinely interested in understanding various people. It also tells me that maybe services are already seeing more LGBTIQ people asking for help. I wish, of course, that abuse didn't happen in our relationships, but we know that it does. So I'm glad that people are out there asking for help. And I'm also excited because I know that when LGBTIQ people do ask for help, because it's not a matter of if, but when, that they will hopefully get a more inclusive service from well-informed workers. Just to give you a little bit of background about my current role briefly, in August of 2015, Prue Goward, who is the New South Wales Minister for the Prevention of Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, announced a one-year funding grant for ACON to further our domestic and family violence work. So my role officially started only in November of last year. But it is important to point out that ACON, as well as many other LGBTIQ organisations, have been working in domestic violence for LGBTIQ people in many ways over many years. But I'm telling you this because I think it's important to know that there are not many people in Australia who are also doing work that specifically focuses on domestic violence in LGBTIQ relationships. This means that I may not have all the answers to the questions that you may ask, but the reason for that is because I think nobody really has all of the answers. What's important to keep in mind is that we're talking here today about groups of people that have been systematically and socially silenced. Many LGBTIQ people are used to hiding their identity and their stories. We're used to keeping our relationships a secret, and we're used to not recognizing images of ourselves represented in mainstream discussions. I guess what I'm saying is, in a way, we're used to being invisible. Keep in mind that homosexuality was not decriminalised in all Australian states until around 1994, and it was not entirely removed from the DSM until the late 1980s, and the so-called gender dysphoria is still in the DSM today. Oh, sorry, to clarify, the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. More layers of invisibility happen because there just isn't a lot of data and research in the area. We can see that there isn't much media attention, and it seems that very few people have been willing to talk about their experiences publicly, and of course for very good reason. It's only in really recent years where a safe space has been created where LGBTIQ people can overcome, I guess, a multitude of barriers and risks to get to a space where we can say to someone, this is who I am and this is my story and I really need your help. As we begin to listen to people's stories, then we begin to ask the questions. But as we're only just recently asking the right questions, we've not yet got all of the answers. If you take one lesson away from this webinar today, I would really like that lesson to be that because we don't have all the answers to your LGBTIQ clients' issues, you may not be able to apply the knowledge that you already know. You most certainly will not be able to work on the assumptions that you're used to making. What you can do to improve your work and the support that you give is to create a space for dialogue, a space for listening to your clients, and a space for you to learn. I guess this is just what we're doing right now. The best thing that you can do, though, for your client is to explore that individual's experiences, explore that individual's identity, and explore that person's relationships, explore the barriers that individual face in getting to the point to finally see you, and then, of course, explore that person's best options. As professionals, we all have a responsibility to listen to what people are saying to us so that we can essentially lead them in the right direction. I'm just trying to move my slides. There we go. So I'll present today for about 30 minutes so that I can leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. I'll start by talking about the prevalence of domestic and family violence in LGBTIQ relationships. I'll also start off by doing my best to explain you the acronym LGBTIQ and other relevant terminology, which I know can be confusing, particularly if you're not familiar with it. I'll then go on to talk about the similarities and the differences in the way that domestic violence is experienced by LGBTIQ people, that is compared to non-LGBTIQ people. And what we'll be really looking at in this section are the types of abuse that are unique to our communities and some signs that you can be looking out for and trying to understand with your clients. In part 3, we'll be focusing on the barriers to accessing support. This is really important to understand why it is that you may not be working with many LGBTIQ clients. And that will then lead us into part 4, which is understanding how you can improve your work and the services you and your organisations offer as a whole, just to be more inclusive and to attract more diverse clients and essentially offer them better and a more targeted and inclusive support. So as I promised, I'll now try to explain the acronym and some terminology that I'll use throughout this webinar. There really is a chance that I'll use the acronym LGBTIQ 100 times or more. What just happened there? I'm assuming I'm still on air. So yeah, I'll use LGBTIQ so many times that it might sound tiring, but I assure you it's easier than saying the whole title. Now, the alphabet soup doesn't work for everyone, and it is the centre of much discussion and debate, but it is a widely used term and it gets used for ease. LGBTIQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex and queer. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and assume that I don't need to explain lesbian, gay and bisexual, except to say that I'm also being inclusive here of heterosexuals who may have sex with the same gender, though they may not identify as lesbian, gay or bi. I've put the word queer at the top here because for many this is the most confusing term. The meaning of the word queer can vary, but basically it's just an umbrella term encompassing people whose gender and or sexual identity just doesn't fit within the norm, or it doesn't fit within the other 5 letters of the acronym. Transgender or trans refers to people whose gender identity is different to the gender they're assigned at birth. So, for example, a trans woman is a woman who was assigned male at birth and was therefore raised for at least some time as a male until they either transitioned or came out as a woman. And they may not have had surgery or taken hormones or testosterone to do this. A person who is transgender may identify as trans some of the time, or all of the time, or they simply are male or are female. Intersex people are born with sex characteristics that do not fit into stereotypical definitions of male and female. Many different forms of intersex exist. It's an umbrella term. It's not a single variation or a single, Gender diverse is an umbrella term that acknowledges the different ways that people may identify their gender. So, for example, they may identify as gender fluid, gender queer, or as non-gendered. Brother boys and sister girls are terms used by some, but again, not all. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to describe someone who's living partly or not fully as the gender they're assigned at birth. So, for example, a brother boy is an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander trans man who was assigned as a female at birth. Now, I think it's important to highlight here that the differences between gender and sexual orientation. Someone who is transgender, genderqueer, or has intersex variations may be heterosexual, or they may be homosexual, or any other form of sexual for that matter. It's a common assumption to make that a transgender woman, for example, has relationships with men. Now, that might be true in one particular situation, but it's definitely not necessarily true by any means. And I think that's sometimes how service providers may get a bit confused. And not just service providers, everybody. Now, cisgender is a person whose gender identity matches the gender assigned to them at birth. So that means that if at your birth a doctor announces that you're a girl, then you're raised as a girl and you grow up to live as a woman. Heterosexism is a system of attitudes and bias in favour of heterosexuals. So this can include the presumption that other people are heterosexual or that opposite sex attractions and relationships are the only norm and therefore superior. And I wanted to briefly mention the terms domestic and family in regards specifically to LGBTIQ communities. See, in LGBTIQ communities, family and partners can be different to common assumptions. Partners can include polyamorous relationships, non-monogamous relationships, and non-gendered relationships. Family can be chosen family, close friends, adopted family, and also carers. This can be true in heterosexual, non-LGBTIQ communities as well, but I think it seems like it's talked about a little bit more within our communities. Now, what I said at the start of this webinar is that what we do know is somewhat limited. However, from the data that does exist, it seems that LGBTIQ people are as likely as non-LGBTIQ women to be victims of domestic and family violence. So that's about 1 in 3 who have experienced it in a past or present relationship. Now, there's even less data for transgender and intersex and gender diverse people. the limited data that we have for transgender people's experience of domestic violence suggests that maybe 60 to 80% of trans people have been victims of domestic violence.
The references for this data are Calling It What It Really Is, 2015, Private Lives, 2006, Fair's Fair, 2006, Scottish Transgender Alliance IPV Study, 2010.
The data for intersex and genderqueer individuals is really just too low for us to really know. I mean, I could take an educated guess that the extra vulnerabilities that these people have may make them more susceptible to abuse, but as I said, the data just isn't really there yet to support that. Now on to a quick poll. The question there that's hopefully just flashed up in your screen is domestic and family violence different in LGBTIQ relationships compared to non-LGBTIQ relationships? Wow, we're looking at about 50-50 here. And the numbers are going up fast. All right, it's looking, it's very close. It's honestly very close to 50-50. 50% of people saying yes, 50% of people saying no. Now, to show you how unfair I was really being, I'll stop it there. The numbers are still going nuts. I appreciate everybody's input into this. I would say it's about 50-50. So I was a bit mean then. It was a little bit of a trick question because, well, the answer is that there are similarities and there are also differences, which was probably reflected in your answers. But I really wanted to get a sense of what you were all thinking before I went on to discuss both similarities and differences. My slide won't move. Sorry, I'm just, there we go. Now, starting with similarities, there are many similarities between LGBTIQ domestic violence and non-LGBTIQ domestic violence. The key elements of domestic and family violence are the misuse of power and control. If there isn't an imbalance of power, then it's not domestic and family violence. The prevalence is another thing that's similar. As I said before, it seems to happen in about 1 in 3 relationships. The impacts of domestic violence and trauma for both the one experiencing the abuse as well as for children, family and friends, that's also similar. A fear of not being believed, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, and victim blaming or self-blaming. And the final point on the slide mentions the impacts of the responses that an individual gets, both professional and informal responses, that is, but I want to particularly highlight the formal responses. Now, we all probably know that for anyone seeking professional help, especially from minority groups, if the first response they get is negative, then they're likely not to try for more help. They're likely to probably go back to the abuser and stay in that relationship, or in general, they may suffer even more negative impacts. This is the reason why awareness and understanding of LGBTIQ people's issues is so vital. Oh, there we go. Now, I want to move on to discussing the differences. I've separated the differences based on sexuality and gender, although they do have similarities and crossovers. Some of the unique ways in which abuse can play out in same-sex relationships are by the abuser using the other person's sexuality against them. Now, this might look like calling them derogatory names, making them feel less than or ashamed about their sexuality, or even telling them that they're not really gay. An abuser can also gain power by threatening to out the other person's sexuality to their family, community, their workplace, or even publicly via social media. In saying that, the person who's not publicly out about their sexuality could also use the fear around being outed as a trigger for abuse, and can also prevent the partner who is out from engaging with the LGBTIQ community. An abuser cutting their partner or a family member off from community events and having connections with friends and family is a common isolation tactic in LGBTIQ relationships. An abuser might say that their partner's friends are too gay, for example, or that their family of origin should be rejected for not understanding their gender or sexuality. It's not uncommon for an LGBTIQ person to rely on friends and community, particularly if their family has cut them off. And so an abuser who cuts that person off from that support network is further isolating that person. An abuser may pressure the other to conform to sex or gender norms. That could be telling the other person not to act or look too gay or too butch or too femme, for example. It could also play out in the way that same-sex couples navigate their roles in relationships. Some couples may try to fit into a heteronormative pattern in their relationship, and there may be tension around who does what in the relationship or how one person can reaffirm their masculinity or femininity. And finally, for this slide, an abuser might pressure their partner into behaving in a certain way. Some examples of this might be insisting that all men or all gay men have sex in this way, or telling a partner that this is what happens when two women are together. Now, for people who are transgender, intersex or gender diverse, an abusive partner might say offensive things about their gender and or their identity. They might use offensive language like referring to them as it and using the wrong pronoun deliberately. An abuser might ridicule the other person's body, their appearance and identity. They might tell their partner that he or she is not a real man or not a real woman, for example. I want to add here that an abuser might also force their partner into sexual acts that are typically not related to their gender identity. So by that I mean like coercing or forcing someone who identifies as a man, for example, into doing something sexual which is stereotypically very feminine, or of course vice versa. They might deny their partners access to medical treatment, such as hormones or testosterone, or pressure them into pursuing medical treatment, or on the other hand, not pursuing medical treatment as well. And finally, they might threaten to out, so to speak, their partner's gender history to their family, friends, workplace or community. And finally, for clients living with HIV, an abuser may threaten to tell people that they have HIV. An abuser with HIV may coerce their partner by saying to them that they will get either more sick or die if the partner does or doesn't do A, B or C. An abuser may prevent the person with HIV from receiving medical treatment, or they may take advantage of them by creating dependence or assuming sole power over their economic affairs. And finally, an abuser with HIV may threaten to infect their partner. I think it's important to note here that laws on disclosure of HIV status, it does differ from state to state, and I know this is a national webinar, so you might need to look into that as well. Now I want to move on to accessing support. Research tells us that very few LGBTIQ people are accessing support for the abuse that they experience, and that when they do reach out, people are mostly turning to friends for support. One statistic that I've shown here from a recent New South Wales report titled "Calling It What It Really Is" suggests that not even a quarter of the people who contributed to the research saw a counsellor, and that only 12% reported the incident to the police. Now, that's compared to 59% of heterosexual cisgendered women who, according to this report at least one incident of domestic violence to police. Obviously, that shows that low reporting to police exists both in LGBTIQ and non-LGBTIQ communities too. But it does indicate that there are extra barriers to reporting for our communities. Now, I know these statistics are only from one report each, but they're not that different to other reports which all indicate that the majority of LGBTIQ people experiencing domestic and family violence are just not accessing services and not reporting to police. I want to compare the reasons for not reporting between LGBTIQ people and non-LGBTIQ people. And even though this information is taken from the New South Wales report, I think it is very telling. The main reasons why, according to these reports, the main reasons why heterosexual women don't report abuse is a fear of revenge or escalating violence from the abuser, shame and embarrassment, and a belief that the incident was trivial. Now compare these reasons to those given by LGBTIQ people who are not reporting the abuse. Those reasons are a fear of not being taken seriously, a high threshold for abuse, a fear of discrimination, and a fear of being outed. Now, the obstacles to accessing support are very much unique to minority groups, but that last point in particular is really uniquely an LGBTIQ issue. I think this may be especially true for people living in regional, rural and remote areas, for high-profile people, and people new to identifying as same-sex attracted or new to identifying as not fitting into the gender binary. So let's look now more closely at the question of why don't LGBTIQ people access support. One reason is not knowing where to go for formal support. There are no domestic violence refuges for gay men, for example. Many transgender people refused access to services, in particular religious-based organisations, or they're simply just not safe or feel accepted and welcome into mainstream services. And if they are welcome, services may not understand their particular needs. Many LGBTIQ people don't have informal support networks. Many people lost the support of their family, friends and community when they came out. Or even if they still have family and friends in their life, they may not be able or comfortable talking to them about their relationship. As you can imagine, a person whose family refuses to acknowledge their sexuality is probably not going to tell that family that they're having problems with their partner whom that family refuses to accept. Many LGBTIQ people have a justified fear of homophobia and transphobia. In addition, heterosexism and societal constructs around gender mean that when LGBTIQ people talk about their relationships, they either have to explain themselves, educate people, or correct people's assumptions, which, as you can imagine, if you're experiencing domestic violence, you don't want to have to sit and educate the person who's supposed to be helping you. LGBTIQ people may not want to have to come out about their sexuality or gender, or maybe even talk about their identity or their lifestyle. They may not even recognise the abuse as being abuse. Now, this comes down to all of the media and political messaging that domestic violence only happens in heterosexual relationships, and this myth that lesbians aren't violent and men can't be victims because they can just stand up for themselves and fight back. And then at the bottom there it says there's a fear or an uncertainty about legal rights. And that's especially true if there are children involved or they have a house or other assets with their abuser. Some more reasons are that the abuse may not be seen as serious. Again, this comes down to the idea that women can't do a lot of harm and that men can stand up for themselves. And we see this a lot in regards to sexual assault in same-sex relationships. The myth that women don't rape and that all men just want to have sex all of the time. A lot of LGBTIQ people are not used to talking about their relationships, as I said at the start. Obviously, if they're still in the closet, so to speak, then they aren't used to talking about it. But probably also for LGBTIQ people living in regional areas, LGBTIQ people who are from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, if they have a disability, or if they're living with a chronic illness. And also for older LGBTIQ people who come from a time when it was illegal or perverse to be in a same-sex relationship, and they come from a time when it was definitely not okay to have any kind of gender variation from the assumed norm. There's also long-held feelings of shame around sexuality, gender, lifestyle and body. And these feelings of shame stop a lot of people from reaching out and asking for help. And at the bottom of the slide there, I mentioned cumulative factors. What that means is that for people who have experienced abuse throughout their life, they often form a higher tolerance to it, so they don't recognise it as easily. They tend not to recognise more subtle forms of abuse, and they're usually not used to getting help for it as well. Now let's move on to another quick poll, just to make sure you're all awake. This quick poll is a bit of a myth buster. The question is, which one of these is the myth? So to clarify, only one of them is false. I'll just read out the options as you fill in your answer. There are fewer referral service options that are LGBTIQ appropriate and safe. The law does not offer the same protections to LGBTIQ people experiencing domestic violence. If a victim does want to take an incident to police or to court, their original birth name and or gender may be disclosed. And many LGBTIQ people do not have appropriate family support for their situation. The majority, well, numbers are moving quick again, but the majority definitely seems to be option B. Yeah, quite a few people said option A, but option B seems to be the majority. And the right answer is B. So the majority are correct on that one. The law actually does offer the same protection to all people who experience domestic violence. And that's despite the fact that LGBTIQ people's relationships are not treated the same under the law. So namely in regards to marriage rights, adoption laws and so forth. But I also want to, I'll stay on that slide for a second. I want to highlight option C there that says if a victim does want to take an incident to police or to court, their original gender and or birth name may be disclosed. You might find that people will ask you this, and it's really vital to get the right legal advice for each case. So how can your service be more inclusive? Oops, I skipped too far ahead there. Now, I'm asking this because particularly because many of you working with people from LGBTI communities, it might be fairly new for a lot of you. I did see the registration list before the webinar, and I saw that a very small number of you who are listening live work specifically in LGBTIQ services, but the majority of you don't. As I said earlier, getting it wrong can be so harmful to the people who come into your service. You may actually be the first and only attempt they make at getting help. So first of all, don't assume the gender of your client or that client's partner. Again, a common mistake is assuming that a transgender male or female is in a heterosexual relationship. And as far as assuming someone's gender, I recommend not using the words he and she until you know what someone's preferred pronoun is. And words like sir and ma'am have caused a lot of problems. I myself have been in that awkward situation where someone says, hey sir, ma'am, sir, ma'am, so ma'am, sir, ma'am. Now, it may be just awkward when it happens on an airline, but it can be so damaging when accessing support for something as serious as domestic violence. Treating everyone the same is not necessarily meeting their individual needs. So sending a gay man to a men's behaviour change program not tailored to gay men is not necessarily meeting that person's needs. Use inclusive language, not just in person, but in all your advertisements, brochures, information sheets, etc. Now, ACON actually has a national program called Pride in Diversity, and so they have some inclusivity resources and do training. And mostly it's really important to listen to your client's experience. Don't make assumptions, particularly around assuming that we're a homogenous group. So what that means is not all lesbians are the same, not all gay men are the same, not all trans people have the same experience, and the LGBTIQ community, it's actually not a community, but a range of communities and cultures and subcultures. And so people's experiences can differ greatly. Let's take the experiences of people with intersex variations, for example. They don't mirror the experiences of a gay man. Myself as a Sydney lesbian, my experiences of discrimination do not mirror the experiences of a sister girl from the Northern Territory. It gets very complex, but just always bring it back to the individual you're working with. Their experience is their experience alone. So now I'll focus the attention away from individuals to the service as a whole. To be more inclusive, your service can encourage staff to attend LGBTIQ awareness training, and I guess to allow further time for staff to participate, not just in educational programs, but community events as well. You as workers can make sure that your organisation doesn't hold any exemptions from the Anti-Discrimination Act or have any policies or procedures that will exclude people based on gender and or sexuality. It's really simple and easy to display LGBTIQ resources and materials at your workplace. I think it's important to nurture active partnerships with LGBTIQ organisations. It's fairly easy to add an inclusivity statement on your webpage or social media. And on your intake forms and other paperwork, just get rid of the M and the F gender tick box. Try swapping it for a comment box or contact an organisation like ACON and ask them what the best practice is. Now, I've put up a list of national services here that you can refer your clients to.
National LGBTQI services include the National Police Assistance Line, phone 131 444. Some police stations have an LGBTQI liaison officer known as GLLO, Gay and Lesbian Liaison Officer. Anyone can try to contact a GLLO directly, but some stations do not have them and they are not available 24/7, but general police are. Another service is Q-Life, phone 1800 184 527 or www.qlife.org.au. This is a free telephone and web-based counselling service with referrals and support for LGBTQI people and their families. Open 3 p.m. to 12 a.m. every day. Another service is OII Australia, Intersex Australia, www.oii.org.au. They provide information, education and peer support for intersex people nationwide. Another resource is Another Closet, www.anothercloset.com.au. This is an online resource with information and referral details on LGBTQI, domestic and family violence.
Every state has different state-based services, but as a national webinar, I can't really go into any particular state services. I do get asked often if people should refer their client to an LGBTIQ specific service or not, and again I say ask your client. Not every LGBTIQ person will want a targeted service, but then of course many will. Also note that as far as I know, there are no 24/7 LGBTIQ specific domestic violence services, but there are 24/7 domestic violence support services, and of course police are 24/7 as well. And I guess that's really why I felt it was so important to give this webinar today, so that all of those services doing such great work can be more prepared for LGBTIQ people, as many will have no choice but to use those services. Now, that brings me to the end of the slides that I prepared for today. And although I could keep talking about these issues, I was completely aware that I have a very diverse range of people listening today. And so I really could only give an overview as a kind of introduction to the topic. In just a second, I'll go back to Kelly, who has been looking at your questions and knows the pre-submitted questions as well. But I'll just quickly say that if I don't get to answer all your questions now, please don't hesitate to contact me. I believe my email address is up on the next slide.
Text appears on the screen. The Frontline Workers Toolkit at 1800respect.org.au/toolkit. You can also subscribe to the 1800RESPECT newsletter at 1800respect.org.au. For further questions about this webinar, please contact Kai Noonan on email knoonan@acon.org.au. And, if I don't know the answer to your question, and there's a good chance that I won't, then maybe we can endeavour to find out the answer together. As I said, it's still a largely unexplored area, though I do know, of course, some amazing Australians doing great research and work into LGBTIQ relationships and abuse. So now I'll pass it over to Kelly to throw some of those hard questions at me.
Thank you, Kai. Thanks for the wonderful presentation so far today. We've got quite a few questions that have been pre-submitted and are coming through the chat box, so I'm going to jump straight into a few of those. And the first one that I have is, as an LGBTIQ specific counsellor, I'm beginning to see some clients who are polyamorous. What are the implications of family violence in poly relationship?
Cool. Again, the mainstream messaging around family violence mostly features either a husband or wife or male and female ex-partners. I personally haven't actually seen a mainstream discussion of domestic violence that talks about abuse in polyamorous relationships, except for maybe the occasional documentary of cults. Of course, polyamory does exist in heterosexual relationships, but it seems to be far more openly discussed in LGBTIQ communities. And I would even say it's more prevalent in our relationships, though I don't actually have any data on hand to formally support that. At the start of the webinar, I said that LGBTIQ partners can be different to common assumptions. Now, abuse can occur in all of the various forms of relationships. I've heard stories of people being abused by several partners simultaneously and in collusion with each other. My concern is that the implications of this are that relationships that sit outside of the monogamous norm are not taken as seriously. Someone may say or think, well, it's not a real relationship if you sleep with other people, or he or she is not your primary partner, so why don't you just leave them or stand up to the abuse and fight back, or something like that. If we know that it's not that simple and easy to leave an abusive relationship, then we know that it's not that simple and easy to leave whether or not the relationship is with a primary partner, a living partner, a casual sex partner, and so on. Abuse is abuse. Regardless of how different that relationship looks, the person experiencing the abuse needs support and the person abusing needs an intervention. That's my answer on that.
Great. Thank you, Kai. And another one, what is the relationship and connection between violence in LGBTIQ communities and gendered understandings of domestic and family violence?
Oh, I love this question. It's a really big question, though. I'm pretty sure it could be a PhD or a life's work. So to be honest, I may not do this question justice by trying to answer it in under a minute or two, but I'll speak to it broadly. Abusive relationships is generally looked at through the lens of patriarchy. And I do support the fact that the majority of relationship abuse is perpetrated by men against women. But when we look at abuse in LGBTIQ relationships, it does pose somewhat of a challenge to traditional concepts of domestic violence. On the one hand, while all abuse takes place within the patriarchal society we live in, applying the patriarchal model, let me think. So what I'm trying to say is, on the one hand, we've applied the patriarchal model to service provision and interventions. And what this has actually done is it's contributed to the restricting of support options for LGBTIQ people. So for us, in our communities, that's a resulting problem of using the gendered understanding for domestic violence. In saying that, however, heterosexism, homophobia, transphobia, and other forms of discrimination contribute to the domestic violence in LGBTIQ relationships. And they are also part of patriarchy. So this patriarchy sees homosexuals, trans people, and every other person who doesn't fit into the strong, straight, masculine, white man ideal as effeminate and weak. So I think that as long as we can extend this patriarchal explanation and the gendered the gendered explanation for violence, to say that it's not just men versus women, but men versus everyone who isn't very manly, then it can fit right in, and it doesn't have to contradict that gendered understanding that we have. Hope that answers that question. Like I said, it was
wow. That's fantastic. Thanks, Kai. Very insightful. So I'm going to jump to a much easier question than that big one.
Thank you.
To break it up, I've had someone ask, is there a symbol that represents LGBTIQ in inclusive services that could be used on promotional material that you're aware of?
Yeah, we do have symbols, of course. Everybody knows the rainbow flag, everybody knows some of those symbols, but for me it's not just about putting a symbol on and saying, well, that's okay, we're inclusive because we've got that symbol. It's about making sure you've got something to back up that symbol. So we do have the rainbow tick. We do have other organisations doing a lot of training to make sure that services are legitimately inclusive, and not just that they don't discriminate, but that they do actually include people and welcome people who are different. So yes, if you use the rainbow flag, people will identify with it and they'll see it, but is that good enough? And your organisation can, like I said, access services like Pride and Diversity to make sure that the service you're giving is legitimately inclusive. So that's what I'd say about that one.
Great. And another really practical question, is it okay to ask client questions about their gender or sexuality?
Yeah, like of course you'll need to get some basic information about your clients, so such as their preferred pronoun, the pronoun of their partner, if it's relevant to your work with them. What you ultimately want is to create an environment which is comfortable for your client to disclose to you the information which is relevant for you both to know. But relevance here is the key. When LGBTIQ people are identified as such, many workers have a habit of focusing their attention on the client's sexual orientation or their trans identity or their intersex status rather than the presenting issue, in this case, the abuse that they're experiencing or that they're perpetrating. Look, I think it's okay to ask the questions that you need to ask in order to provide the right support, but you don't want your client to feel that they need to educate you, the professional, in order to get a satisfactory service.
Great. Thanks, Kai. And another one. Although we can train and monitor all staff to make sure they are inclusive and don't discriminate, how can we make sure that other clients don't discriminate, threaten and exclude LGBTI clients?
Yeah, I think many LGBTI people don't access services because they already anticipate discrimination from other clients. And in particular, I think perpetrator programs and residential settings. But I'll turn the question back to you. How do you prevent your clients from assaulting other clients or taking illegal drugs on premises or from stealing? I think if you can be proactive about preventing other serious crimes, then you can be proactive about not tolerating discrimination and exclusion.
Great. I'll move on to another one. If we have two women presenting at our service who are in a relationship with each other and both claim they are the victim and the other is the abuser, what can we do to understand the dynamics and essentially figure out who is the abuser and who is the abused?
Yeah, again, I'll just say, bring it back to your basic skills. Just work with what's in front of you, putting your assumptions aside and listening and not making any rash decisions. I can't say to you that, the bigger, more masculine one is always the abuser because it just simply isn't true. Though I do hear from people in our communities that police, service providers and even bystanders, friends and family do often make that assumption. Ideally, I'd like both parties to get adequate support, which is why we all need to make our services better prepared to work with LGBTIQ abusers and survivors. I understand that it's hard for services who can only work with one of the partners and that they need to decide which one, and it may not be clear from the start. But again, like that is one of the added complexities when working with people in our communities. So again, it's situational and a case at a time, and drop those assumptions and listen.
Great. How can a women's service be inclusive of trans women?
Well, a trans woman is a woman. She may identify as trans, or she may identify simply as a woman. The best thing that you can do is to treat her as an individual. Ask her what she needs to be better supported, and then take a zero-tolerance approach to discrimination from staff and from clients. I'm assuming that this woman is not going to the women's service because she's transgender, but because she needs help with something else going on in her life. So focus on that issue and not her gender. I would tell you a story that I did hear from a client a few years ago. She was actually refused crisis accommodation in a women's service, and the reason she was given was because they didn't have the right bathrooms for her. Now, this story stuck with me for years. I guess this organisation, who I won't name, they panicked in some unfounded fear around this woman's body. And what I'd say to them, if your clients don't have privacy in a bathroom or when they're getting dressed, then maybe it's worth reflecting on your policies and procedures that exist around privacy. Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Kai. Any differences when considering perpetrators of violence in the LGBTIQ community?
Yeah, look, I believe there's a real and pressing need for more research into perpetrator intervention models and their adaptability for LGBTIQ people who choose to use violence. Many LGBTIQ people won't or can't access perpetrator programs, and the ones who do tend to drop out early, most likely because they either don't feel safe and comfortable or because the program isn't targeted to them and therefore isn't of any real use. When working with LGBTIQ clients one-on-one, you use all the basics that you know about, not colluding and holding them accountable and so forth, but keep in mind just not to make generalised assumptions based on their gender and or their sexuality.
Thanks, Kai. Another question is, what is the link between domestic violence and homelessness for LGBTIQ people?
Well, in general, we know that domestic and family violence is a significant driver of homelessness in Australia. And we know that LGBTIQ people have a higher rate of homelessness at some stage in their life. Not all people will become homeless as a result of domestic violence, but there are other contributing factors as to homelessness involved for a person. LGBTIQ people tend to have other contributing factors as well. Less family support maybe, they have more barriers to accessing services, we have a higher risk of suicide, we have a higher drug and alcohol use, not because we're innately different, but because of our life experiences. There's definitely a need for LGBTIQ inclusive or specific crisis accommodation options so that LGBTIQ survivors, those who are not cisgender heterosexual females, can find adequate support and safety. So that would be one suggestion that I would make to help with the large percentage of LGBTIQ homeless people that we do see.
Good, okay. And are there any specific services to support LGBTIQ people who are experiencing domestic or family violence in rural and remote areas?
Yes, on the Sydney side, I'm a bit biased, but I would say if you're in a rural or remote area, then the internet or phone counselling might be your best bet. QLife, for example, is a national LGBTIQ phone counselling service. Now, each state will have different service options, and you would need to look into that before your clients come to you. I'd say phone counselling may be your best bet because it's easier for a caller to be anonymous, as confidentiality and anonymity can be very hard in smaller towns. And you could also refer a client to the next town for face-to-face services as well, perhaps.
Right. And how do you see mainstream tertiary hospitals playing a role in reducing responding to LGBTIQ clients who have experienced domestic and family violence?
Yeah, I think hospitals can play a big role. I've heard of staff not using the DVSAT for LGBTIQ individuals, even when their injuries may clearly look like injuries from violence. And I think that's because it doesn't dawn on the staff there that it may be intimate partner violence. People who may not want to access support or may not know how to access support for relationship and family abuse may still need medical help. So I guess you can be that person who refers them on to help or gives them the right kind of information when they wouldn't otherwise seek support for the abuse that they're experiencing. So I don't know, give them the details for the Another Closet website. That is www.anothercloset.com, or give them state-specific information. And don't underestimate the power of calling it what it is, because you may be the first person who identifies it as domestic violence, and just pointing it out for what it is could be a massive help to them. So I think the frontline staff, such as hospitals and police, do play and can play a really massive role in helping our communities.
Great. And look, one last question before we move to closing the webinar. How do we bring this issue to the forefront of the news on a regular basis, or how do we change the mindset of the media to focus on ways to resolve this problem? Another big question, Kai.
Oh, yeah, but that's okay. Look, the LGBTIQ community just doesn't have a rosy baddie. We don't really have that public survivor story or public role models. And again, I think this probably comes down to fear and maybe even shame around our identities and our relationships. I love the energy and attention brought to the domestic and family violence sector in recent years. And I think with all that attention, there is room for discussion around LGBTIQ relationships. I mean, I guess that's a key part of my role. I would love to see more media focus, and it's something that I will work hard to try to achieve this year. It probably comes down to a lack of funding. I think with more funding, we can do research, we can run more awareness campaigns. Generally, I'd prefer to get the media's attention that way through research, awareness and campaigns, rather than by having some horrifying event that makes the front page of the news, which may have triggered or has triggered a lot of the discussions nationally. So hopefully we don't see that, but instead we see more funding put into more roles like mine, not plugging it, but so that we can create those campaigns and get that media attention.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kai, so much for the whole presentation and for answering all of those questions. We've had a number of more questions throughout the webinar that have been submitted, and we're not going to be able to get to all of them. But as I said, Kai's email address is at the bottom there, so if you'd like to follow up with any specific questions, feel free to do that. I'd like to give a special thank you to everyone that submitted their questions today. And finally, I'd like to give a very big thank you to Kai for preparing this presentation and giving it to us today. We have had a record response. We will send all of these slides and also a copy of the recording to everybody that's registered. So if you had any difficulty with any technical issues, or if you arrived late at any stage, you will receive a copy of these slides and the full recording. In addition, Kai has also has a video that she would love to share with you. Again, that will be sent out via email to everybody that's registered, so you can watch that. So finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to bring your attention to our next webinar, which will be held on Thursday, the 23rd of June. It will be held with Angela Weller of the Australian Childhood Foundation, and the topic of this webinar is Trauma-Informed Understanding and Responses to Children Affected by Family Violence. And it provides a comprehensive insight into the impacts of family violence on a child's development and functioning. To find out more or to register, you can visit 1800respect.org.au/webinars, or you can subscribe to our newsletter, which is on the front page of our website, or access our Frontline Worker Toolkit, which has all of our webinars as well as a range of other resources. We also encourage you to download and share the app Daisy, which is an innovative app that connects women to a wide range of support services. They can be downloaded by the Google Play or the App Store. Simply type in Daisy or 1800RESPECT to find her. Now, please stay online. We will love you to take our online survey, and you'll be redirected to this shortly. Thank you again for your participation, your questions and your feedback, and we'll try and follow up with as many people who have outstanding questions as possible.
Well, thank you again. Jump in and say thank you as well, everybody, for listening, and thank you for actually taking out a good substantial amount of time to really pay attention to LGBTIQ people. So on behalf of my communities, I'd like to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Guy. Thanks everyone again, and we wish you a very good afternoon. Bye for now.